How important is faith when making decisions inside a boardroom? Well, today we are going to answer that very question. But first, I want to give you some statistical data for background context as we begin this discussion. According to research from the Barna Group and C12 Business Forums, 51% of faith-forward CEOs say their faith is a highly motivating factor when it comes to making leadership decisions, while also impacting the leadership style they choose to implement. Meanwhile, additional research from Houston Christian University reveals 74% of Christian leaders rely on their spiritual background and guidance, practice, and reflection when making decisions. And finally, 63% of Christian CEOs say that they rely on the Word of God when making and seeking out how to make decisions that impact the future and present of their companies or organizations. This is all good news and food for thought from my friend Carl Grant III. He's a Christian business leader who helps people live an abundant life, both at work and in society, through faith-centered leadership, discipline, and purpose. He's also a best-selling author and Army veteran. He boasts a 25-year-plus career in business growth, revenue generation, business development, in professional services. Throughout the course of his career, Grant has advised executives, leaders, and founders and executive teams on building trust, strengthening relationships, and producing tangible results without compromising your moral and ethical convictions. And Grant join me this week to tell me more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. I started my conversation with Grant by asking him how he believes faith, leadership, and business are all interconnected to achieving prosperity and success.
Well, I think that servant leadership is key, and I know that's kind of a cliche term, but let me explain what I mean by that. What I mean is that if you are leading people and everything that you're doing vis-a-vis those people is related to how it's going to benefit you, you're not going to be a very effective leader. And so what I'm advocating is that you think about the people you're leading and their needs first and foremost to get the most out of them. And so I learned this not necessarily in a business setting, but in the military, when I was training to be an officer in the military. And so I the military is very strict and it's very, command oriented, right? There's a person in charge and people follow. It is less so in the corporate world. There's more of a encouraging people to do what you want them to do. Organizational structures are not as defined as they are in a military setting. That said, if you are leading individuals in a military setting, just because you tell them what to do doesn't mean they're going to do it and do it the way you want it to be done. And so the way to get them to effectively do what you want them to do is to be thinking about their needs first. And I've seen leaders do this well, and I've seen leaders not do this well. And so I'm thinking about the leaders I've seen in my past who have put the needs of their soldiers above their own good at any time. Um, it goes to just looking out for their personal needs, right? If they get a speeding ticket, trying to get back to a unit formation, rather than chastising them for being late, figuring out how you can help them pay for the ticket that they got coming to that formation late, right? So there's things like that where you go above and beyond, and you're like, oh my gosh, this guy has my back, right? He knows I was trying to do the right thing, and in trying to do the right thing, I made a mistake. It got me in trouble, but he's going to help me cover that up because he's got my back. It's just those little things, right? There's things that we do as part of being an officer that do that, like eating after your soldiers eat, for example. And so what does that look like in the business world? In the business world, thinking about your people and their families and their needs, and not just, like, for example, if somebody's has a personal situation, a death in the family, a new birth, something, caring for a sick parent, to ask that person to do things during the time that they were expecting to have to care for that sick parent, for example, rather than saying, look, I know you're caring for your sick parent. I need this project done by Monday. I'm going to need some help from you over the weekend. And oh, by the way, I know you're taking care of your sick parent. Let me see if I can get you some help with that. Just going the extra mile to make sure your people are taken care of is a way to let them know that you care about them, and that when you ask them to do more for you, they do it in a way that they want to do it for you, right? And you're going to get better results. Does that answer your question, Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that your time in the military, as you had mentioned, serving in the army and your time in business has really given you a sort of a bird's eye view on what it means to live an abundant lifestyle. So tell me about living the abundant life, because I know you wrote a book about it and how it translates into leadership in business as well, my friend.
Well, it's interesting. So I wrote the book, How to Live the Abundant Life, that amazingly hit some bestseller lists on Amazon when it came out. And when I wrote it as a business book, as essentially a leadership book for what I did in my professional life. I did professional services business development. PricewaterhouseCoopers was the first business development hire, and at Cooley I was head of. It was a law firm that I grew, is head of business development from 310 million in revenue to over 2 billion in annual revenue. And so, but I changed the focus, because it's really a niche focus for people that want to know how to do that type of work really, really well. And so, as I decided to move it into more of a self-help book, I looked at those things that made me successful in my business life, and I thought about what they were and how they also applied to my personal life at home and in the community and in nonprofit organizations. And those are the principles that I talked about in the book. And it starts with, and I'm not going to go through, I can't possibly go through the whole book on this half-hour Zoom meeting, but what I can do is touch on, it starts with your thought life, and then how your thought life translates into what you verbalize. And when you think about your thought life, you think about what you visualize and how you visualize yourself. And so only you control what goes through your mind. And so I give people tools of how to get their thought life right, which will in turn change how they speak, which will in turn change their reality because we speak things into existence. I'll give you kind of a silly example, right? I'm I am I just became a grandfather a week ago, so
Congratulations.
I am in that stage of life. If you follow me, Kevin, but there's a lot of people at this stage of life that are friends of mine, from high school, college, etc., over life. And I hear how a lot of them talk about themselves as in getting old. They talk about their medical problems. They talk about the things they can't do. And I listen to that and I watch them talk themselves into this advanced aging process, right? Where these people actually look and act like old people, right? Whereas I don't talk that way. I mean, because I have in my mind an abundant life and I think thoughts of abundance and I speak abundant, words. I am manifesting my own healthy, active life, even as I advance in age and become a grandfather. And so, I've seen others do this as well. I follow, it's kind of a funny thing to do, but I follow, some of these fitness influencers that are in their 60s, and I look at them. I'm like, holy crap, you look really good. You look better than most of the people in their 20s look. And some of these people have had, like, there's a woman that I started following recently. She's had 5 children. I have 5 children. My wife bore 5 children, so I know what toll that takes on your body. But she refuses to be, that pudgy middle-aged woman. She's 60 years old, and she looks better than most 22-year-olds. So I'm just saying, the people who have the right thoughts and speak the right words and take the right actions. And it's just not all about this. It also translates into your lifestyle, how you conduct yourself, how you set goals for yourself at home, in the community, at work. And so I talk about, how to achieve what otherwise might be impossible, right? I've done some seemingly impossible things, writing a book, learning to fly an airplane, going to Harvard, late in life. I mean, those are things that seemed impossible to me, but I figured out how to break them down into achievable tasks that turned into meeting an amazing goal. And so that's the journey I take my readers on through my book, and hopefully I've touched on enough of it, Kevin, to make it sound interesting to you.
Absolutely. And Carl, I'm also curious to ask you because I know that we share the same belief that building relationships is sort of the heartbeat of success in business and in life, quite frankly. So I wanted to talk to you about the importance of building both trust and strengthening relationships within the office and how that is critical to building a great organizational culture. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Well, the whole world runs on relationships. People like to do business with people they know and trust. Right? If you look at it at the highest levels of government, of business, and even personal life. And what I'm talking about here is if you look at the conflicts that exist in the world. I mean, there are conflicts, and I don't want to drill into the politics of today's conflicts, but there are conflicts in the world today. In when you end up in a conflict, world leaders, it's because they don't have the basis of a relationship where they can reason with each other and talk, right? Just think if the president of our country had a personal relationship with, let's just throw it out there. The president, I don't even know who, well, I guess they keep killing them. The president of Iran. I mean, if the guys knew each other, if they had a relationship, they might have been able to reason through some of the things that they're now, pulling each up over,
Mm-hmm.
and so and you think about you know, it, President Trump, love him or hate him, he did walk across that line in from South Korea to North Korea, and he shook Kim Jong Un's hand, and everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, how could you shake his hand?" He actually sat down and had a conversation with the guy, and you know what? We have never gone to war with those guys, right? They may be perceived as our adversary, but there's a relationship there, and so I know those are kind of radical examples, but you take that down to the business level, right? You've got a business that should be doing business with another business. They should be doing a partnership or a deal. If those CEOs don't know each other, it's going to be really hard to have that trust to be able to enter into a relationship where you can do a deal, even if it makes the most sense in the world. A deal might be had with somebody who doesn't make as much sense, but there's a relationship there, right? And so I've watched this time and time again throughout my career where deals get done because people know each other. They took the time to have a cup of coffee or sit down and have a lunch together. Those are the types of things that make the world move, and it works in the family as well. If you want your family members to abide by your wishes. If you do that in a dictatorial manner, and you don't have a relationship with your spouse, with your children, with your parents, it's going to be really hard to make them want to see things your way, right? And do things that you might want them to do. And so I'm just saying, develop those relationships. And when you go to develop a relationship, going back to, I think, my first point is you don't go into a relationship with your hand out. What can you do for me? Right? It's like the leadership skills we talked about earlier, Kevin, where it's what can I do for you? That is the better way to approach a relationship, is by serving the needs of others, and then they will in turn feel better about you when you want, to try to get them to come to your way of thinking or acting or whatever it is you want from that person.
Yeah, absolutely. And Carl, I also know that you're the founder of an initiative called Bridges of Faith, which is a Christ-centered initiative focused on the respectful Muslim and Christian dialogue, and it provides people with a practical framework for peacemaking and building and understanding it and living in our faith with both humility and clarity, my friend. So tell me about Bridges of Faith and what you want people to know about it, my friend.
Well, once again, going back to relationships, right? So many people throughout the world look at people from other cultures, other faiths, and they dress different, they talk different, they have different holidays and customs, and they look at them with suspicion and distrust. And it's not just one way, it's both ways. I mean, and I have had the privilege of traveling throughout the Middle East a lot in recent years. The past 4 years since I left my full time work at a firm, and have been consulting and doing other work. I've been to Saudi Arabia 3 times, and I've been to Pakistan 3 times, and I've been to other Muslim countries as well. But those are just recent visits, and I've gotten to know the people there. I've gotten to become friends with these people over there. And the first time I went to each of these countries, I just listened. I listened to people. I asked questions. I learned all about, what's important to them, about their faith, about their practices, their culture. It was fascinating, and quite beautiful. And the interesting thing is, Kevin, I for half my life, I wasn't a person of faith. I was an atheist. I grew up as an atheist, and I may be perceived as a particularly religious guy now. I don't like the word religion, but I went from nothing to something, and I became a Christian at the age of 24. Well, 10 years later, I really got curious about what does the other half of the world believe. I had no idea, none. And so I mean, I knew history of the Middle East, but I never knew what their faith taught them. And so I just picked up a copy of the Quran English translation in the bookstore, took it on vacation with me, and I read it in 1 week. And it was eye-opening. Um, you know that 70% of what Muslims believe is the same as what Christians believe. There are some distinct differences, but a lot of it's the same, you know. And so as I discovered that, and as I made these friendships over there, I realized, and I've actually seen others who have, had similar initiatives in the past. I felt led, prompted to start this group called Bridges of Faith, and it was really only meant to be a private Facebook group and a Zoom meeting where we met every couple of weeks and we studied the Word together. I was wanting to learn more about the Muslim faith. There's the Quran and there's the Hadiths as well, and the Hadiths are kind of like, think about in the Christian world commentary. You might have a commentary on the Bible, right? And so I wanted to learn more about the Hadiths. I wanted to learn more about what they believed, and so we started doing these meetings, and we started, taking different topics and studying them from the Hebrew Bible perspective, the Quran, maybe some Hadiths, in the New Testament, and we share with each other. We pray together. We made friends, and it's really been beautiful. We've been doing it for a year and a half, and some amazing friendships have been developed. And so, some of my Muslim friends who have participated have encouraged me to take this to the next level, to develop it into um, a global NGO. That's a non-governmental organization. So I started out, I didn't know anything about forming an NGO. I had never had a goal of doing this, but I looked into it, and you started out as a nonprofit organization. So we formed it as a nonprofit organization, and we formed a board of directors, half Muslim, half Christian, and we're now planning to grow this into an international organization, not just people that meet on the Zoom call, but local chapters, where we have trained facilitators that understand both faiths and can bring people together. And nobody's trying to convert anybody. That's not the goal here. The goal here is to have this dialogue in love and to understand each other and to learn from each other and to build community with each other. I was invited to go to an interfaith iftar dinner, and you may not know what that is. An iftar dinner is when Muslims do the month of Ramadan. They fast 40 days. They don't eat food or drink water during the daylight hours, and they break fast. And when they break fast, they have this dinner called an iftar. And the ambassador to the United States from Pakistan is an interfaith guy. He's a Muslim from Pakistan, but he embraces people of all faiths, and he had an interfaith iftar dinner, and I was so honored to be able to go in Washington, D.C. And so that's what we're trying to create, is those types of communities where people have relationships with each other. They're not looking sideways at each other with distrust. They're understanding each other. And I have Muslim friends that reach out to me and ask me to pray for their children when they're sick. I think that's absolutely beautiful. They know we're praying to the same God. We have different, ideas of how we approach that God, but nonetheless, they know that we believe in the same one true God.
Yeah, absolutely. And my next question is related to that in terms of, the importance of living life with passion, particularly in these divided times, because I know you believe it's important to engage people with truth and love, especially cross-cultural lines, while also being anchored in the scripture or that sort of guides this conversation. So tell me, in your view, how does a passion fit into this equation, my friend? What are your thoughts then?
Well, I think if you wake up and you're not passionate about the things you're doing in a given day, I don't know how you motivate yourself to go about achieving the things that are before you, right? And so like I said, I envision the things that I believe I'm called to achieve. I believe each of us has a a calling in life. And I talk about that in my book, right? Because a lot of people go through life and they don't know why they're here, they don't know what their purpose is, and they don't know what their calling is. And I talk about how I discovered my calling. And once you realize the work you're doing is actually a calling, then you can approach it with passion because you know that not only have you been equipped to do it, but you've been called to do it. And it is part of what you're meant to do. Right. And so, and some people may feel called to do something in the ministry world. Right. And when I became a believer at the age of 24, I felt that call like, oh my gosh, I went 24 years without knowing God. How could I go on throughout my life and not allow others to know about this very important relationship that has given me so much happiness and joy and fulfillment? And so I felt this compelling to go out and talk about it like I am right now. And so that said, I was not being called into full-time ministry. And so I was being called into a workplace ministry. And I ran this ministry called the High Tech Prayer Breakfast for 20 years. I'm still chairman of the board of this organization. And it was it was an annual breakfast, but we had, other meetings throughout the year to organize this thing, and we developed fellowship around it. But we would bring over 800 people together to hear a message from somebody who was a believer, a Christian, in a business context, and it was a really wonderful thing. And so I was able to incorporate that calling, my calling to be in ministry, into my business life, and I was quite passionate about doing it because I knew I was meant to be doing it. It's not the only thing I did. I've done many other things, but I'm just using that one example to tell you how my work wasn't just generating revenue for a law firm, it was bringing the good news to the business community. And that made me passionate.
Our friends over at LinkedIn reported last year that 92% of executives sometimes lack discipline in their execution, with 92% of executives admitting that sometimes their lapse in making leadership decisions are because of a lack of motivation, which they rely on to make decisions rather than structured discipline. So I asked Grant his thoughts on how we can ensure more executives across America are disciplined in their decision-making process.
It's interesting because that really ties back to the first question you asked me on leadership, right? I think if you're leading your people properly, uh, they should be properly motivated to do what you've asked them to do. And so I think the more you can motivate your people, the less you need structured discipline. And so, I don't know if that study shows good results or bad results coming out of this, right? If 92% have not followed through, how many of those 92% actually motivated their people so that they didn't need to, kind of be on top of them all the time, right? That's what I wonder, right? I think it's good to do both. Like, you motivate them so you know that they're going to do their work, even if you're not checking up on them. But then you also have those checkups. For example, my team, when I led a team for, a good part of 20 years, uh, we met monthly. We would have a monthly business development team meeting. Um, but it wasn't because I needed, these were all very talented, very highly motivated professionals that were doing their jobs. They were well paid and well motivated to do their jobs. And so I set them up with their goals, working with the partners in their particular practice groups or offices or regions that they served. And then, I would check in to make sure they were doing this. Each month when we had these meetings, we would report, and then I would do a 6-month review to make sure they were on target for the goals that we had set, and then we would have a final review at the end of the year. And so I relied more on motivation than I did on structured discipline, but I had some of that in there just to make sure. and I was never really disciplining anyone. I really only had to eliminate one person from my team over the decades that I led them, and I think that was success.
Yeah, absolutely. And Carl, I also wanted to make sure I asked you about clarity because Yahoo released a study last year that said 85% of working Americans believe that leaders should be held to a higher standard for communication, preparation, and providing clarity in terms of what they want their workforce to do from a performance standpoint. So tell me about the importance of providing clarity for your workforce if you're a leader. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Well, I think it's very important, and I'll give you an example. When we were setting goals for my team, rather than just making those big goals, like go out and win business, bring in new clients, right? That would be the easiest, like vaguest, you know, um, goal setting in the world, right? But
Mm-hmm.
instead, narrowing down the numbers of new clients you're expected to go out and generate in this role, right? For example, and not having outrageous goals, but having achievable goals, like a couple new clients a month. So if you, for example, let's just take a simple example. If you say we want you to help win 24 new clients in a year, and those are just new clients. Well, those all could be pre-revenue startup companies that we could, those are easy to win because they have no money and not paying you anything, right? They're just signing up, right? And so that's because I didn't give you clarity in the goal. But if I say we want you to bring in 24 new clients in a year, and out of that 24, we want two of them to be IPOs, or we want two of them to be litigation clients. We want five of those to be middle market companies above a certain revenue threshold, right? Or an M&A backed company or a venture capital backed company, right? Then there's more specificity around those goals and there's more clarity. And so when I would set a goal with one of my team members, we would have the number, and inside that number we would also break that down into the types of clients that we were looking to win, and in each of these team members had a different set of goals. They weren't all the same. And they were customized for those team members. And I would allow the team members to talk with the partners they served to come up with those goals and to bring them back to me, and we would discuss those goals. So they had a hand in creating the goals and creating the clarity about around what they were going to do in the year. And I think that was the most effective way of setting good, clear goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And Carl, tell me how your time. I know we talked about this earlier, but I want to know how your time in the Middle East helped you to form a better and clearer picture when it comes to conviction, courage, and compassion. And how do you think your time exposed to the Muslim community has changed your faith and the way you lead, my friend? What are your thoughts then?
I think, when you're a person of a particular strong faith, which I am, and I have no doubt about what I believe. But then you go and you visit with and learn about and watch, um, and really befriend people from different cultures, different faiths, different communities, and you get to know them. I was having this discussion with my wife earlier today. You know, people in that world are very, very sincere about their faith and their belief. And if you get to know them and watch and listen like I have over the past year and a half, and you understand how they put their faith into action, you start to realize that these people have a heart for God, right? The truly faithful ones. Not all of them, right? Not all Christians have a very good heart for God, but the ones that are truly sincere in their faith, in their truly seeking God and His truth, and I feel like we're on this journey together, right? I'm on a journey of discovery. Yes, I read the Bible. Yes, I take the Bible as truth, but what else can we learn? I believe that we're in this earth with nature around us, with I mean, there's so much to discover in this world, in this universe, that perhaps is outside of the Bible. Not everything is in the pages of the Bible, right? And as I get to learn this rich culture over there, it's not like they're this religion was made up 5 minutes ago. This has been around 1,500 years. There's a long tradition in what they believe and what they do, and it's very sincere and heartfelt. And I think it would behoove people to go and get to know and understand that they're trying to get to the same place we are. And when you get together with them and you start to get to know them and you really start to develop this true bond of friendship, you realize that we're working through this life together, and we have more in common than we do apart. I don't know if I've answered your question, Kevin, but I'm somewhat passionate about this topic because I am a person of peace, and I'm a person who takes the call to love your neighbor as yourself pretty seriously, right? And that doesn't mean your neighbor who looks like you and talks like you and acts like you and believes like you. No, it means your neighbor, and if you think about the illustration that Jesus gave us, where somebody, one of the disciples asked him, well, who is my neighbor? Remember that? And he talked about the Good Samaritan, and he talked about who was the neighbor to that person who was beat up and needing help along the path. It was not a fellow Jew or a fellow person who looked like or believed like or acted like them. It was actually somebody that they didn't like, right? And so that was the neighbor. It was the neighbor who helped that other person. And so I think in the larger scheme of things, we're called to love our neighbor, and that's what it's really helped me to do, is to learn how to love my neighbor.
Yeah, and Carl, just because I'm personally curious, with your 25 years in executive leadership, and as you know, I have cerebral palsy, and I advocate for the hiring of folks with disabilities and the full integration of folks with disabilities in the workforce. And I think that leaders that are hesitant to hire people with disabilities are missing out on an untapped segment of our population. So I'm curious to ask you about the competitive advantage that people with disabilities can offer to a workplace, and how we can convince more executives to change their attitude around this so that we can eliminate barriers to inclusion in the workforce for folks with disabilities. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
I think that some of the so-called disabled people that I've come across are some amazing people. And what I'm going to give you an example of, you may have a blind person who can't see,
Yeah.
but that blind person's hearing is compensating for their lack of vision, right? And so they may have an audio perception that your seeing population doesn't have, right? And I think if you take the time to really get to know someone and get to know what their strengths and weaknesses are, I think if I asked you, Kevin, you're here doing things that somebody with which you struggle with may not even dream of doing, right? But if I asked you, I said, what are your strengths and weaknesses? You would probably tell me there's some things that you're really good at, and there's some things that maybe you're not so good at,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you're gonna take a guy who's missing two legs and have him, running, doing a job where he's got to run sprints back and forth, carrying boxes, or to use an extreme example. But that person may have an incredible mind. You may have an incredible mind to be able to solve problems, and so you want to take that person and deploy their assets where they're going to be able to add value. did not put them in a place where their weak spot is going to be exposed. And so, that's my approach to people who struggle in one area but are amazingly gifted in another area. And I'm sure, Kevin, your disability doesn't define you,
Hmm.
does it?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't. I am sure that if I thought about it, I am disabled in many ways, right? It may not be apparent in talking to me and communicating with me, but I bet there's some things that you can do way better than me. I don't know what those things are, but I bet, maybe you're really good at math. I don't know. I'm not very good at math, to be honest with you. I mean, it's not my strong suit. My wife is. She's an accountant. I was a journalism major. I'm better with words than she is, right? And so you're not going to put her in a situation where she's got to, communicate with words. She's better with communicating with numbers, for example. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I have to tell you, I went into journalism because I didn't want to do math, and it was shorter than law school. So my a lot in life was either to be a judge or a journalist. And when I found out journalism school was shorter, I picked journalism instead of law. So that's my story, my friend. But
You're kind of journalism right now. That's not really a
yes.
word, but you know.
Well, I like to be a trendsetter too, right? So, but
Yeah.
Carl, I wanted to ask you finally about the wisdom of human connection and the lessons that you've learned about, the power of human connection because people, we're a people-centered society. And, there's a sign in my office that says, no matter how many degrees you have on a wall, you can always learn something from somebody else. So tell me about the power of human connection and why it's important uh, to providing you wisdom and clarity in the work you do and the people you meet, my friend. What are your thoughts there?
Well, look, we are not put into this life to be lone wolves and do this by ourselves. We are built for community. Think about everything we do, right? If you're going to start and run a business, if it's just going to be you and only you, you're not going to build much of a business with just one person. Uh, I mean, there's so much of what we do that requires other people. Think about producing a child. Good luck trying to do that on your own, right? A man needs a woman needs a man to produce a child. As far as I know. I mean, maybe there's other ways to do it, but the way I did it, and I've got five of them, it took getting married, having a wife, and she bore me five children, right? That is a human connection, right? I mean, it's not easy to find a wife, and to then stay married to them for 31 years, which I have done, right? That is a profound human connection. The same things can be said about business connections. There are some business connections I have that are absolutely divine connections because I look at the things that I'm able to done together with individuals that I've been brought together with to work on things with that I could have never done by myself. I'll give you an example. Um, a Muslim friend of mine from Pakistan who I have reconnected with and am doing some things with business wise. He is really into the interfaith mission that I have, and he has been the one challenging me to step it up and move it to the next level. If I didn't have this human connection, I would not have taken the step out to take it to the next level. And I'll give you an example of something that he did that I had envisioned. I had envisioned building an app that would allow people in my community or people throughout the West and the East, people who are interested in the topic, to be able to study topics from both the biblical perspective and the Quran perspective. And so he's built that app without me even asking him. That is a human connection where he took something that I had envisioned and was looking to do, couldn't figure out how to do it through my contacts, and he just built it and he presented it to me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you built this thing that I've dreamt of that I couldn't do by myself. If I didn't have that human connection, this app wouldn't have been built. And now people, in the West can learn about what people in the East believe, and the same and different than they do, and same with them in the East. And so it's all done through a human connection that resulted in amazing technological development. Does that help, Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely. And Carl, my final question for you this afternoon is a two-part question because considering the times that we're living in, my friend, I wanted your perspective on how we heal rather the societal divide we seem to be in today. Because I wanted to start this podcast because I looked at the world and I said there has to be more that brings us together rather than tearing us apart, my friend. So how do you think we can heal societal divides? And how do you want your own personal and professional legacy to be defined? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Well, when we talk about healing and division, I the division bothers me, and I'll take you back to a point in time where there was a lot of division in the country, and if you remember back when the whole George Floyd incident happened, and all of a sudden people in society were divided, and it was just horrible, right? And let's not even get into what happened there. That was one incident that was magnified, but it brought out all of these divisions in our society that I think that the media and politicians, um, and social media. If you ever watched the Social Dilemma, if
Mhm.
you watch that, oh my gosh! I mean, how it just divides us up, and if you buy into these divisive words, um, you can buy into the lie that we're all supposed to be divided up. So when this thing was at its height in terms of dividing up people in society, I was sitting over. I live near a resort over here. There's three pools. There's a hot tub, and I was sitting in the hot tub. And what was interesting to me, Kevin, was that I was the only white person sitting in the hot tub, and it was the most diverse crowd you could ever imagine. There were people there. There were black people there. There were Asian people. There were Indian people. There were Middle Eastern people. I mean, we had the whole world represented in this hot tub, and I'm watching. Look, I'm just watching how we're carrying on, talking to each other, and getting along like best of friends. And if you turned on the television, you would think that we all hated each other. But we didn't. We loved each other. And I just said, I looked at the people in the hot tub. I said, it seems like we're getting along just fine. And they all said, yeah, we are. The media is lying to us, right? And so that was just an example. I'm like, I am not turning on the television set, on the news or whoever, and listening to them tell us how we hate each other when we don't. We don't. I got great friends. I've already talked about my Middle Eastern friends. I have great black friends. I have great friends from every culture, and I don't look at them as my black friend. I look at them as my friend,
Mhm.
right? And let me give you another example, Kevin. I was walking through the old city in Jerusalem. There's the old city of Jerusalem. I don't know if you've ever been there, but in the old city of Jerusalem, they have quadrants,
Mhm.
right? They have a Jewish quadrant, they have a Muslim quadrant, they have a Christian quadrant, and they have another quadrant that is, it's another Christian sect, I forget, Armenian. I think it's the Armenian quadrant. And you would think those quadrants would be like dividing lines, that just are like hard and fast, and these people don't like each other, they don't talk to each other. And so as I'm walking through there, because we hear on the news about all this division, between religions and so forth. And when you walk through the old city and you go from one quadrant to the next. And so I walked from the Christian quadrant to the Muslim quadrant. And you can tell when you leave one and you go to the next, because if you just look at the kind of the artwork in the Christian quadrant, you see the cross. you see the crucifix. And when you get into the Muslim quadrant, you see the crescent moon, and you realize, I mean, there's not a sign saying you've now entered the Muslim quadrant. You can tell you've walked into it because the artwork is different. All right. The people don't look any different. They're all pretty much the same, right? But then I would go, the interesting experiment to me was, I asked, as I got into the Muslim quadrant, I said, "Tell me about your neighbors. I want to hear about your Christian neighbors, you know."
Mhm.
And you know, I guess back when I did it, I was thinking maybe I would hear something negative. I didn't know, you know. And you know what they said? They said, "Oh, the Christians, they are our brothers," is what they said. They said on our Sabbath, they take care of our shops so we can stay open. So now, follow me on this, right? So in the tradition, in the quadrants there, they have different Sabbaths for the different faiths. The Muslims celebrate their Sabbath on a Friday, the Jews on a Saturday, and the Christians on a Sunday. And so the idea that on a Friday the Christians would come over to the Muslim quadrant and watch their shops for them, so that when tourists came through, they could be open, but they're not working on the day that they're supposed to be resting. I thought that's just a beautiful thing, you know. Uh, Despite whatever you hear in the news, the people inside that quadrant, they love their neighbor. They
Mhm.
love their neighbors, right? And so I'm just using that as a picture, the hot tub and the old city, to talk about how you just can not listen to the lies that you hear in the media and from politicians that politicize race and faith and everything else, right? They divide and conquer, and we don't have to live like that. We should love our neighbor.
Yeah, absolutely. And Carl, finally tell me, if people want to get connected with the good work that you're doing, my friend, what's the best way they can do that?
Well, probably social media is a good way. So you can find me on Instagram if you want to follow me. Carl.grant, that's CARL.GRANT.III. I'm the third. Or you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm just Carl Grant on LinkedIn. Follow me on Facebook if you want. Same thing, just Carl Grant. And if you're interested in the book, if you're interested in the topics we've talked about, if you go to Amazon and you type in "How to Live the Abundant Life," and if you need an extra thing to put in there, put in my name, Carl Grant III, and you'll certainly find it. And if you reach out to me and tell me you read it and you want to talk about it, I'm happy to talk.
Fabulous, my friend. Well, I want to thank you for engaging in a conversation about the intersection of faith, leadership, and business today, my friend. Your work in the space is most appreciated, and your time on my behalf is certainly duly noted, my friend. And I want to thank you for being here. It's most appreciated.
And Kevin, I want to thank you for being a brave man and for doing what you're doing. You should be commended for what you're doing. And, I admire you for it. So thank you.